one characteristic of the Laura Ingalls Wilder fans and the Little House on the Prairie fans is they're very passionate people with very strong opinions. And that's great, but that's why I say we want to make sure that they understand we're not trying to take something that was created already in the 70s and the 80s and simply, reboot it, continue squeezing whatever milk we can get out of that cow. That's not the point.
Welcome to Land of Laura, the irreverent yet scholarly podcast about all things Laura Ingalls Wilder. Little House on the Prairie. When we say that, we could mean any number of things. We could mean the book that came out in 1935, the third book written by Laura Ingalls Wilder in what would become the Little House series. We could also mean the TV show that debuted in 1974 on NBC starring Melissa Gilbert. Or we could be talking about the new TV adaptation of the Little House books that will be available for all of us to watch this July on Netflix. Today on Land of Laura, we're talking with Trip Friendly of Friendly Family Productions, the executive producer of this summer's adaptation, whose father, Ed Friendly, launched the original 1970s TV series along with Michael Landon. Also in the studio is his daughter, Rebecca Friendly, the COO of Friendly Family Productions. It really is a family business. Welcome to the Land of Laura studio, Trip Friendly and Rebecca Friendly. Hi.
Thank you very much, Sandra. It's a pleasure to be here. And first of all, I'd just like to thank you for creating such an excellent podcast. Fascinating guests, great questions. It's very informative. It's very interesting. We in the Laura Ingalls Wilder Little House community, I don't think we ever tire of new perspectives or information about Wilder herself or her life. And I think you've given a gift to the community by creating this podcast, for which I want to thank you. We met you about 11 years ago at Laurapalooza in 2015 in Brookings, South Dakota. I'm delighted that our friendship continues, and thank you for having us on your podcast.
You're welcome, and I am delighted too. I have seen you a few times over the years. I know that I saw you, certainly at Laurapaloozas, but also I believe you were at the opening of the new museum in Mansfield.
Correct.
And I think I saw you there. And also I saw you at the 50th anniversary in Simi Valley.
That's right. All happy memories.
Trip, we have a lot to cover. Let's first dive into your origin story, which I know goes way, way, way back. You spent your early childhood on the 8th floor of an apartment building in Manhattan, and that's where you first read the books. Can you let us know how that all unfolded?
Absolutely. It starts even further back than that. My mother, who was born in 1927, was the first generation to grow up reading the books and absolutely loved the books. And she introduced the books to my sister and me when we were kids growing up in New York City. And of course, the world described in the Little House books is so different from Manhattan. And so it was a wonderful vehicle for escaping to another time and another place. And I think in some way, the Little House books contributed to my interest in history. I was fascinated by how they lived, the history of the period. There's so many little tidbits, for example, in Little House in the Big Woods, playing with the pig's bladder as a toy and so forth. So it was so vividly described that it captured my imagination. And to a certain extent, I guess I identified a little bit with Laura because I was someone who got into trouble from time to time myself. And my sister became absolutely passionate about the books and reread the whole series every year.
And it was your father coming upon her rereading the books when she was a little bit older. Wasn't she a teenager that kind of led to his interest?
That's right. So we later moved to Los Angeles. My father started his own independent production company in Los Angeles. She was a teenager. I think she was maybe 14, 15, 16. And he came upon her one day. She was sick at home and she was rereading the books. He asked if he could borrow one of the books, which he did. He had a business trip. He took it on an airplane and he read it. He hid it inside of a Time magazine so people didn't think he was reading a kid's book, I guess.
Do you know which book it was by any chance?
I don't, and I'm not sure he remembers. I looked in his memoirs. He wrote really wonderful memoirs for the family, and he doesn't specify, so I'm not sure. It may have been Little House on the Prairie, I'm not sure. But he finished it on the flight and realized what great television these books would make. It was my sister's and my mother's passion for the books that led him to contact the rights holder and work out a deal to option them. My mother actually was after my father for many years before that to look into optioning the books. He had been the head of all special programming at NBC in New York City. He mostly was involved in variety shows, comedy shows, skit comedy shows, and things like that. Bob Hope, Frank Sinatra. So very far removed from the world of Little House. And so it never seemed to be in his wheelhouse. And then when he discovered what great books there were, she said, Ed, I told you. So my mother was also very influential, and my mother worked with my father, particularly in creative development, evaluating projects, reading books, and so forth. So she was very involved as well. So my father contacted Roger Lee McBride, who had inherited the copyrights from Rose Wilder Lane, Laura Ingalls Wilder's daughter. Laura Ingalls Wilder passed away in 1957, Rose Wilder Lane in 1968. Roger Lee McBride, who was an attorney by training, inherited the rights. My father contacted Roger, invited him to Los Angeles, flew him out, and they spent a weekend together discussing the books, discussing my father's vision. At the time, Roger was actually in discussions, maybe even negotiations, with the Walt Disney Company to develop one of the books into a movie, or a movie for television for Walt Disney.
My grandfather saw, when he read the books, he recognized that they would make great episodic television, so that people could grow up alongside Laura in watching her from child to young woman. And that's why his vision was to do multiple books. That's where he and Roger really shared a vision, was seeing this as more than just one book, but as the full series.
That's a good point, because he felt, as I feel today, that the books are so episodic and they lend themselves better to episodic storytelling that you can do in a long form series than in a single one-off feature film or movie for television. So he said to Roger, look, I'm not interested in just one book, optioning one book. My vision is to option all of the books and to develop a long-form, open-ended television series. And on that basis, they reached an agreement. My father then, with his own independent production company, financed the development of the script for the pilot, which was unusual at the time for an independent producer to spend his own money, because it's quite expensive to adapt a book. So he found a wonderful writer, a woman named Blanche Hanalis. She loved the books also. He hired her. They worked very closely together for a number of months to write the screenplay for the pilot. Once he had a screenplay, he and my mother had seen an episode of Bonanza called The Wish, which Michael Landon had directed. And so my father and Michael knew each other, not very well, but they did know each other. But my father was very close friends with Lauren Green, who played the patriarch on Bonanza, and asked Lauren about Michael, told him what his ideas were. And Lauren said that he agreed that Michael was a very capable director and that my father should consider him as a director for Little House. So my father sent my sister up to Michael's house. They lived rather close to each other, with the script in the morning. And in the afternoon, Michael Landon called my father and said, I want to direct it, but I also want to play Pa. Then my father took what's called a package, right? So it's a screenplay, and has certain creative attachments, in this case, the star and the director, and set it up at NBC.
And so the pilot was very true to what was in the book, Little House on the Prairie.
Yes, my father, even though he grew up in New York City and we grew up in New York City, my father's mother, my grandmother, was born in Napa, Idaho, which is in the western part of Idaho near the Oregon border. He would take the train out to Idaho with his family, and they would spend summers in Idaho. And so he had this abiding love and appreciation for the West and the rituals of the West and the gymkhanas and the rodeos. So there was a part of him that felt very connected to the history of the United States, the West, and so forth. He grew to really love the books, as I think we all did. His vision was to create a faithful adaptation of the books, in as much as you can do that when you translate from a book to a television. And so the pilot is quite faithful to the third book, Little House on the Prairie, which was the book that he decided to launch the television series with. In those days, you did not get a direct-to-series order from a network. Typically, they would agree to finance a pilot. They would air the pilot. If the pilot did well, got good ratings, they would then order a first season. And unlike Netflix today, which typically will have an 8-episode season, in those days it was 20 plus episodes typically. So yes, it was reasonably faithful to Little House on the Prairie. And it still gives me goosebumps when I hear the music and I hear Melissa Gilbert's narration at the beginning of the pilot. They're leaving the big woods. It's cold, it's dark, it's snowy, and they're off on this adventure to unknown worlds. I think he did a beautiful job. I think Blanche and Alice did a wonderful job with the script. The first couple of seasons of the show were largely based on the books, On the Banks of Plum Creek. There are certain episodes, Country Girls is one, which are very true to the books. But Michael Landon and my father had a divergence, I guess you could say they had creative differences about the direction the show would take. I remember many years ago in an interview, my father said, "I have no doubt that this will be a very successful show." Michael Landon is a very talented director, a very talented artist. And I have no doubt that it will be a successful show. It just won't be the show that I envisioned and that I wanted to do. So he backed off of daily involvement in the show, but his production company was still involved. And so you'll see in the credits an NBC production in association with Ed Friendly Productions.
Shortly after that, Ed Friendly Productions was responsible for Young Pioneers. Do you know how that happened?
Well, absolutely. So he and Roger Lee McBride both shared a vision for how they wanted the Little House books to be adapted. As many of your listeners will know, Rose Wilder Lane appropriated, without her mother's knowledge or consent, some of her stories and wrote them for adults rather than for children. So that includes Free Land, that includes Let the Hurricane Roar. Roger and my father discussed, well, maybe we should take a stab at adapting those books. And so my father acquired the rights to those books and developed a show which became Young Pioneers. There was a Young Pioneers Christmas, or Young Pioneers 2, and there was a short-lived attempt to make a television series. And my sister actually worked on that show. The focus of the show was more on the couple and really resembles some of the challenges that Laura and Almanzo face in the first 4 years.
And that was based on Freeland.
Yes.
Young Pioneers proved to be your father's last foray into the Little House world for many years?
Yes, that's right. When he was well into his 80s, my father had an opportunity to revisit the Little House books. And I think he always had it in his mind to do a new adaptation. So in, I believe it was 2003, 2004, he produced a series based on Little House on the Prairie, the third book, which was shot up in Alberta, Canada, and again was very faithful to the original book. It was broadcast on ABC's The Wonderful World of Disney, and the idea was to take each book and create a miniseries based on each book. They ended up not picking up the rights, and so the only book to be adapted was Little House on the Prairie. And that was broadcast in 2005, a couple of years before my father passed away.
Was he happy with it?
I think he was. It was interesting because he said to me, he said, "Look, I'm so involved in this that I had to join the Writers Guild of America for it to be legal for me to be as involved in it as I was." So yeah, I think he was happy with it. Obviously disappointed that it didn't get picked up.
Sure. I loved it.
Yeah, it was a wonderful experience for him. It really was at the end of his life to be involved with that.
So you were in college when the original show aired. I think I mentioned to you a long time ago when I was talking to Dean Butler, when he was cast on Little House, he had never seen the show before because he was busy watching Monday Night Football as a college student in the 70s might do. What was ultimately your awareness of the show?
I was also away at boarding school when my father acquired the rights, and we were all very excited about it because we love these stories, we love these books. My dad invited me on the first location scouting trip for the scene where the opening was shot up in Northern California. We flew, I think, into Stockton, California. And that was a blast. That was so interesting. When I was much younger, I had grown up going to the sets of shows he was involved with in New York. One of the other shows that he created or co-created was Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, and I spent a lot of time on the set on Laugh-In before I went to boarding school. So that was a lot of fun.
Did you sit on the big chair?
No, I didn't. I never sat in Edith Ann's chair, Lily Tomlin. Anyway, so I was on this location scouting trip. And then I was back in boarding school, and I was not involved in the production. The pilot was aired in March of 1974. That was my senior year. I graduated in June, and then I went straight to college. So during the production of the series, I was not involved. I did not have an opportunity to work on the show at all. And frankly, my mind, probably like Dean's, was elsewhere. When you go to a boys' boarding school and then you find yourself in college, you tend to have other interests. I did not spend a lot of time in the evening watching television. I was either studying or meeting people and having fun.
So how did your awareness of the show develop? Obviously, you watched it at some point, and I'm just trying to, or did you? Maybe you didn't.
No, I did. Yes, I did watch it, but I watched it more as an adult than a teenager. So it probably wasn't until it came out on video cassette, and we had video cassettes. I'm sure Rebecca will speak to this at some point, but we had video cassettes in our home, and then of course we had the DVDs and so forth. There are a lot of hours to get through on this show, so it's it's not like today where you can binge watch an entire season, in a weekend.
Exactly.
I became more familiar with the stories in the TV show as I grew older. Although, at the beginning, I think I saw the first season probably, which I liked a lot.
So by the time the Disney miniseries came out, were you involved in your father's company?
No, I wasn't, because I was executive vice president of Ticketmaster International. And so I was spending upwards of 3/4 of my time traveling around the world. We were expanding Ticketmaster, so I was running around acquiring companies and expanding our operations. So I did not get involved in the miniseries. It was not until later, as my father's health started to decline, that he asked me to get more familiar with his business. I had worked for many, many years in film and television financing and international distribution. So it wasn't until later in life that I started to get involved in the business and started to conceive of what's the next step for Little House on the Prairie. So I started by reading about 55 years worth of banker box files. My father passed away in 2007, and that was the year that we created Friendly Family Productions. And we transferred the rights to the intellectual property that had been owned by Ed Friendly Productions into Friendly Family Productions. And thus began my journey to find out what the potential of these rights was, if there was a future for them in theaters or in film or television.
So I imagine that involved rereading the books. Was it different to read the books as an adult versus as a child?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that question, Sandra, because I actually was exposed to the books in 3 different phases of my life. When I was a kid, and then when Rebecca was born, as she was growing up, I started to read the books to her. And so I had the perspective of a young father reading these books and not putting myself in the place of Laura, but identifying with Ma and Pa as a parent. And how were they raising their children, which I have to say was quite admirable. And maybe I got a few pointers along the way of what to do and what not to do. Again, I appreciated the same descriptiveness that was in the books, the bringing you into another world, into another time period. That captivated me as a young father. And then also how modern the parenting seemed to be, how to talk to your children. When they get in trouble, there's a wonderful scene where Laura gets in trouble with her parents on the banks of Plum Creek, and they talk to her the way modern parents might talk to their children, which is, I'll paraphrase, but it was this notion that if you cannot be trusted, then you must be kept an eye on, and so therefore you must stay inside today so that we can keep an eye on you, which is, of course, the worst punishment that Laura could endure, being stuck inside.
And in the dugout.
Yeah. So that was interesting from a young parent's point of view. And then I rediscovered the books yet again. I reread them several times in 2007. And I loved them. I wasn't a grandfather yet, but I loved them as an older father. And I read them with a sense of trying to understand at a deeper level what the stories were really about, how they could be adapted. This is before artificial intelligence, and I spent weeks going through every single book and breaking them down into all of their elements. Every person, every animal, every action scene, every song, every recipe. And I manually broke them down to truly understand them and to see how that could be spread out across a new TV series or how it could be interpreted into a feature film. So I looked at it in a different way than in 2007, 2008, 2009, when I was considering what to do with them next.
You hired a company to do a brand analysis of Little House on the Prairie. Can you talk about that?
Right. So we were considering at the time, this is now in 2010, I believe we hired them. And we were considering both adapting them again for film or television, and also if there was an opportunity to create a licensing, merchandising business. We were really just trying to understand what it is we had in our hands in an objective, scientific way. And so we hired a company to do what's called a Q-score analysis, which essentially evaluates how well a television show, a movie, a book, or a brand is known by the public and how well it is recognized. In other words, what is the brand equity? And so before I invested a lot of time in going in one direction or the other, I wanted to know, well, is this a property? Are these books still well known? Is the original television still well known? It was off the charts. The vice president of the company told me that he was astounded because I think he said it was the only time that he'd seen a brand better known then than it had been when it was on primetime television. And of course, you have to remember, in the 70s and 80s, there were very limited entertainment options, right?
Sure. 3 networks.
Yeah, something that was on television for 9 seasons, well, 10 with the 3 movies at the end, would have been extremely well known to the public. So he was astounded. He said, you have a brand, if we can call it a brand, that is very well recognized in North America. And so that helped me to realize, okay, maybe there is an ongoing life to reinterpret this great literature into something new.
Were you involved with the musical?
I invested in the musical. I was not involved creatively very much in the choices, but I was invited to invest. Friendly Family Productions owns the merchandising rights as well, among other rights to the books and the television series. And so we also did a merchandising deal with the production. I went to the premiere at the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis, which was just wonderful, wonderful energy. And I remember sitting in the audience, and behind me was a little boy and his father. And at one point during the production, the little boy leans over and says, "Daddy, what's a buggy?" What's a buggy? So I realized, okay, there are a lot of words in the books that kids probably won't be familiar with, and we need to get them interested in history.
I thought it was wonderful. I was disappointed that it didn't, well, I mean, it did tour, and I did see it on the tour. I saw it in New Jersey. I saw it in Denver. I saw it in Minnesota. And I just thought it was wonderful. And it was probably the first time I was able to see the Little House stories differently. I thought Kara's performance was not how I had always seen Laura, but it was, I don't mean to sound dramatic, but it was almost transformative for me to be able to see Laura in a little bit of a different way than I always had. Her performance was amazing.
I agree with you. And I loved how the focus was on Laura and the Wild Child, right? They had that one musical number, The Wild Child. They really got to the essence of her character. And yeah, you're right. I agree with you. I thought it was beautiful.
And I'm just going to say this because I don't know how many people know this, but Kara Lindsay, the actress who played Laura, and Kevin Massey, the actor who played Almanzo, met on the set, fell in love, and got married, and are still married to this day.
That's right.
I think that's amazing. I interviewed them both for The Homesteader back in the day. It was very sweet.
That's wonderful.
Rebecca, we've reached the time that you end up joining the company. So would you mind sharing with listeners and viewers your own Little House origin story how you were introduced to the books and how it ended up informing your adult life.
Well, it's wonderful to be here. And much like others, my origin story began with the Little House books, reading them as a child with my parents and falling in love with the descriptions that Laura so vividly describes in her books. As a little girl, I was fascinated with first starting with Big Woods and then moving my way through the series and seeing Laura grow up and kind of interpret the world around her. It felt very much to me the way that I was kind of taking in the world, and I was very interested in writing as well and in poetry, and so kind of like seeing how she was finding her voice and finding her perspectives was really interesting to me at the time. I also went on to enjoy the cooking book for kids. I discovered the Little House cookbook for kids actually in my elementary school library.
By Barbara Walker.
Yes. And I remember coming home and trying the lemonade because that was the simplest one for me to make. And that was really exciting to realize that I could take a piece of her story, a piece of history, and bring it into my own life and to share it with those around me. So I think that was kind of a light bulb moment for me. I also remember having the porcelain Ashton Drake doll, the Laura Ingalls doll that my grandfather gave me, and just really, just really trying to be very careful with it because I thought it was very special. And I brought it into school and I did a little presentation where I dressed up as Laura. So those were my earliest memories. And then, of course, as I got a little bit older, we would watch the television series, a VHS. We had a bookshelf in our house that had all of our favorite Little House memorabilia, including the VHS, which for now, for audiences, probably sounds ancient. But yes, that's what it was.
So you read the books first and then you watched the show. Did it feel like part of your family, or was it just something that you liked?
It was something that I liked, and I knew that it was an important part of my family's story, but I don't think I realized until I was much older the mark that our family had on the show and on the legacy. I think that the kind of the magnitude and the enormity of the responsibility and kind of pride and honor didn't really set in until much later. It was just something that was kind of like something we all appreciated and we're all interested in as a family.
So how did you end up getting involved with the family business? You graduated from college in 2011?
Yeah, I graduated from college in 2011, and I had some other jobs out of college that I really enjoyed. And then I took a little break between jobs, and I was home, and Tripp said that he was actually working on a project and if I wanted to potentially help out. And I'm a busybody, so I always want to help. I don't like idle time. So basically turned over some of the brand work that had been done for Little House on the Prairie, the Q scores, some of the research, and asked me to read it, take a look at it, get familiarized with it, and to come up with some ideas for where we could take the brand based on that research. We were talking about the fact that Little House on the Prairie was still so not only highly recognized, but highly beloved. And it had a positive reputation. You know, some brands have less favorability or likability. Little House had high favorability and likability. And we realized that it would be important to start to steep ourselves into this world more fully. And that's one of the reasons why we started to attend events like Laurapalooza and visit the home sites and the museums and meet some of the original cast members who we hadn't met previously, and just to really paint a picture of who's in this community, what is being explored, where are there any gaps that we can come in and fill. And I think one of the areas we realized that there was a hunger for connection and for bringing the Little House on the Prairie community into the digital age. And so at the time, we didn't have a website, we didn't have social media, we didn't have a newsletter, we didn't really have a central hub for people to gather and share their love of Laura, of Little House, and to learn. That's one of the first things that I did, was to create our website and to launch our social media platforms. And I wanted it to be very inclusive, and I wanted it to be a home for all fans, regardless of how they became acquainted with the Little House on the Prairie world, whether it was they were huge Laura Ingalls Wilder fans or they didn't know Laura Ingalls Wilder was a real human being. We have such a diverse group of people who come to this world. And so the idea was to get everyone to connect and to learn and to feel inspired.
And so you oversee the website, and you've been involved in putting together the content, or at least overseeing putting together the content since then?
Yes, exactly. So we've created a lot of great resources. We have a section for Laura Ingalls Wilder scholarship, and we also have recommended reading and book summaries. But then we also wanted to bring it into modern day life through recipes, crafting, gardening, family fun activities. So we have a lot of that type of content for the whole family as well. One of the things we love about the website too is that a lot of our articles are contributed by community members from the Little House world. So I believe, Sandra, you have contributed a couple articles because you are an expert on visiting the homesteads and tips and guides for travelers. We have just a really great group of contributors from, the scholars, Pamela Smith-Hill, Bill Anderson, to the original cast members, Dean Butler, Charlotte Stewart. We try to bring in lots of different perspectives for both fans of the show and of the books.
Right. For every podcast, I do pre-research on the guests that I have on, and invariably in my research, I will come across some article on littlehouseontheprairie.com that is helpful to me.
I'm glad.
We are going to talk about the new Netflix show to the degree that we can. It has been a long road here. Trip, I know there's been a whole lot of projects that sort of got started and stopped. Can you orient the listeners to what this journey has been like?
I would be happy to. And if I can just share an anecdote, in my earlier life in movie financing and distribution, I was working for a company that the CEO came into my office and said, look, we're going to take a meeting with this young director and his producer, and they're going to pitch this very unusual script. I want you to read it, and I want you to be in the meeting because they want us to invest in producing a film. So we met with somebody named Rob Reiner and Andy Scheinman, and the movie that they wanted to pitch was called The Princess Bride. And so at the end of that 45-minute pitch, I said, I don't know if this is going to make money or not, but we have to be involved with this show. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because I remember Rob telling us that the writer had been working for 9 years to get it set up and financed. And so our company came in with the international, 20th Century Fox came in with the domestic, and we made the movie. To this day, it's one of my favorite movies that I was involved with. So I mention that because one has to have a great deal of patience and perseverance in the entertainment industry. And if you believe in something, be prepared for it to take a long time to convince everybody else in the world to believe in it too. So leap forward to, I find myself, Rebecca and I, we find ourselves with this unbelievable property, Little House on the Prairie, or Little House, the Little House books. And it's too good not to do something special with, right? Great literature deserves to be re-examined, written about, and if possible, adapted to the screen. You can think of Little Women. How many adaptations have there been, right? And so that's how we felt.
That Q score.
Yeah. So my original vision, and this was before the industry changed and streaming sort of took over. My original vision was, we'll make a feature film, a big budget feature film, and that will be successful. I hope we'll do a good job, and that will spawn sequels, feature film sequels, or it will spawn a new television series. We came pretty close. We signed a deal with Sony Pictures. We were in development. We had a budget. We started casting. We started scouting locations, but there was a change in management at the studio, and they put the project into turnaround. So,
And can you explain turnaround?
I'm sorry, yeah. So turnaround essentially means when if a studio has an option on a property, let's say it's a 2-year option, if they decide at the end of the first year they don't want to proceed, they put it into turnaround, and then another studio can come in and pick it up as long as they reimburse the first studio for whatever development cost. So essentially it's like saying, thank you, we don't want to continue with this project, which is what happened at Sony Pictures. So that was at a time when the industry was really evolving. Netflix was gaining power and influence. Streaming was taking off. And so I reread the books yet again after this experience, and I thought maybe my idea of a single feature film is not the right way to tell this story. I think by this time, Rebecca and I were working together, so we felt maybe we need to go back to episodic storytelling. And I have to say, as a huge fan of live theater and film in particular, I increasingly, on a personal basis, was enjoying television because it gives an opportunity to really dig into the story, to get to know the characters. So anyway, long story short, we determined that the right path forward was episodic storytelling. Rather than approach a broadcast network, we wanted to either do this with a premium pay channel or a streamer. The notion there being we would have bigger budgets, we could tell the story in a more beautiful way, production values was important to us. So we also wanted to have enough resources to shoot on location and to try to capture the landscapes that Laura describes in her books, which really are another character and are central to the storytelling and captivated me as a child, for sure. So we went out to, in 2020, in March, before we knew where the world was headed, we went out to the marketplace to announce that the rights were available. And then all of a sudden the pandemic hit. We ended up having, I think, 13 different companies, studios, production companies, streamers, networks, all expressing interest in the material. Clearly, it resonated with where we were as a society. You saw this movement toward focusing on the core values in life, focusing on simplicity. Where does one really derive happiness from? Cozy, cottagecore, planting vegetable gardens, raising chickens, and so forth. So it happened to be at the right time. So we had discussions with a number of different creative teams, and we ultimately chose Paramount Television Studios and Anonymous Content. They had produced a number of really interesting movies and shows together, including The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio. And they introduced us to some creative people who shared our vision, and we thought these are the types of people that we want to be in business with. And so we signed an agreement where FFP would be an executive producer on the show, and we would work with them to develop the TV series. We went to Netflix with 2 scripts written by a very talented writer and showrunner named Rebecca Sonnenschein. Rebecca was one of these precocious children who at the age of 5 years old was already reading the Little House book. And when we started to go out to writers, we told all the talent agents, we only want writers who are passionate about the books. We want them to have grown up reading the books. We want them to love the books. We're not just looking for any writer. We're looking for someone who's a member of the Laura Ingalls Wilder fan club. And in Rebecca Sonnenschein, we found that. She was so knowledgeable. And in fact, I think you saw her speak at Laurapalooza in Sioux Falls.
I did see her speak.
So we feel very fortunate because we trust her instincts implicitly because the material is important to her. She understands it. And we also wanted someone who would create a new interpretation from Laura's point of view. Because after all, this is fundamentally the story of a young girl who becomes a young woman through her personal journey. And so we really felt that was important to emphasize in the show. We ended up staffing the writer's room mostly with women, and we hired all women directors for the first season.
I did notice in the the sort of the nut graph of credits that was in every news story where it listed who the producers were. I think I mentioned this to Rebecca. I was so thrilled, like you were the only man listed.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was intentional. That was deliberate. And we're very proud and very happy with our season 1, which, if I may make a plug, debuts on Netflix July 9, 2026. And we hope that people will find it in their hearts, to those who are fans of the books, to appreciate what we've tried to do with the books, and those who are fans of the original television series will recognize that this is a new adaptation of the books. We're not seeking to imitate or reboot the original television series. That stands on its own in its time. It was made in the 70s and 80s, and we're just trying to do a very special adaptation of the books in 2020s.
Yes, you did mention to me that you were trying to encourage the media not to use the word reboot.
Yeah. Yeah, because people think of reboot, and one characteristic of the Laura Ingalls Wilder fans and the Little House on the Prairie fans is they're very passionate people with very strong opinions. And that's great, but that's why I say we want to make sure that they understand we're not trying to take something that was created already in the 70s and the 80s and simply, reboot it, continue squeezing whatever milk we can get out of that cow. That's not the point. The point is great literature deserves to be re-examined through history and adapted, whether it's to a musical, a play, a new television series. And we think this is great children's and young adult literature, and that it's deserving. And I think if it weren't outstanding literature, it wouldn't survive, the almost 100 years. So that's our perspective, and we will put our baby out there in July 9th, and we hope that people will like our baby.
In a previous conversation, I said I was looking forward to watching something that made me feel like I felt when I read the books, and you pushed back a little bit on that. I thought the point you made then was pretty interesting.
I think it's very difficult to create a television series that can address each individual's imagination. I just know that when I read or read the books, my mind goes to another place. And I have a very personal relationship with these stories, as I imagine most people do. And so it's very hard to replicate or address an individual's person's relationship with a given book. One of my visions for a new adaptation was, and I majored in history in college. All my life I've loved history. I've loved shows about time travel, seeing how the world was. And so one of my objectives was not only to try and capture the essence of the books, but also to bring to the foreground characters, situations, history that was either in the background or maybe didn't surface in the books because it's from Laura's point of view, and Laura can't be witness to everything. So in television, you have to tell the story slightly differently. It's very hard to replicate a book, and I don't think makes good television. So in Little House on the Prairie, the Osage are such a fundamental part of the experience that the Ingalls have, but we only see the Ingalls family's point of view, right? We don't really know what the Osage are like. What's their point of view? They're across the river. What is their life like? And even as a kid, I was always interested in these other people that are just mentioned. Dr. Tan is another wonderful character. The black doctor who treats the Ingalls family and in reality was a neighbor of the Ingalls family. He was also another very interesting character, both historically and in the books, that I felt would be interesting to explore his story. That's the intention, is to create a show that does not reboot the original show and that expands upon the books and brings in history that the family is living in.
And I think just to add to that, television as a medium provides an opportunity to showcase more than one perspective, whereas the books are told from a young child or a young woman's perspective in her situation, in her time, in her place, which sometimes is just, the confines of her home or the perimeter around her home. She doesn't always get to go across the river or walk into someone else's home and see how they lived. Whereas in television, we have the opportunity to do that. So to kind of open the aperture and also bring in the peripheral characters and the historical context in a way that a child may not have witnessed, even though she knew it was unfolding around her.
I think that's beautifully put.
Can you talk about the visuals, about how this show would present visually?
Right. So as I think I mentioned before, the landscape is a character in the books. It's certainly important because you do have an element of man versus nature, right? Or maybe more aptly put, nature's effect on the family and on the decisions they make on the course of their lives. Because most of the first season takes place in the tall grass prairie, we wanted to find tall grass prairie. There isn't very much tall grass prairie left in the Great Plains. So visually, that was important. I think all of us on the creative team really loved the movies of Terrence Malick, for example. I don't know if your viewers would be aware, but Terrence Malick was a wonderfully visual director who took his time and was very interested in the sensory experience that people would have, not just the intellectual, not just plot devices, dialogue, but really how a movie would make you feel, or how the characters inhabit, how they feel through the landscape. And we wanted to try to capture that in as much as we could. So the cinematography was very important. Choosing the right locations was very important. It's interesting, when we were scouting locations in Manitoba, it all looks flat. It all looks uninteresting. But it's very much like the desert. If you drive through it very quickly, you think, oh, there's not much here. But when you stop and you get out of the car and you go on a hike, you walk down to the many rivers and lakes, and you walk through the prairies, it's teeming with life, beautiful locations. So that was visually very important to us. When I was in, I think it was in college, I read a book called, which I think was a very popular book at the time, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And one of the passages that always stuck with me was, it's this man who's reevaluating his life. He's taking stock of where he is in life, and he's crossing the country on a motorcycle. And he describes the experience, the difference between riding on a motorcycle versus driving in a car. And he says, when you're in a car, it's like being in a museum where you're looking at the paintings and you're appreciating the paintings, but you're in the museum. When you're on a motorcycle, you're inside the painting. That always stuck with me. And in as much as it's possible, my hope was that people would feel they're inside of our painting.
My husband was raised in Southwest Kansas, which, if you've ever been near there, it's flat and, looks like nothing. And his grandmother would always say to me, she was so great, I tell people, if you don't think it's pretty here, you're not looking hard enough.
Another thing that was important to us was authenticity. We hired very, very talented costume designers, set designers, whether it was the Osage costumes or the Ingalls family costumes. Authenticity was really important to us. And so the look of the show, it feels historic, it feels accurate.
So we all heard in the news that not only is the show going to premiere on July 9th on Netflix, it has already been renewed for a second season. How did that happen? And what was that like to find that out?
That was very exciting of news, as you can imagine. Netflix was really high on season 1. So I think on the strength of season 1, they felt comfortable greenlighting a second season. That's also very important because we have child actors and those children grow up fast. So if they wanted to continue the series, it was better to do it right away rather than wait for the show to be released. So we begin production in a couple of weeks. We're headed back up to Winnipeg soon, and it's wonderful. I hope we can have 6 seasons or more. I mean, it would bring us so much happiness if we could go through these happy golden years. I think it would be wonderful to take Laura through her courtship and marriage and show her from 10, 11-year-old, through 18, 19. We'll see, but it was very exciting. From a personal point of view, I feel a variety of emotions. One, I feel a tremendous responsibility to the author, Laura Ingalls Wilder. Much of her legacy is in our hands for the way we manage this beautiful property. Rebecca and I both feel a very big responsibility. And then on the other hand, I feel so blessed to have become part of this community because over the course of the last 15 years, we've met such a wide variety of people, from the people who dedicate their lives to preserving Laura's home sites the scholars who continue to delve into these books and her life as a writer, to the creative people, cast and crew who've interpreted these stories in the original show and in the new show, and the fans, so many of whom we've met and really enjoyed developing a friendship with. So we feel very blessed to be part of this community and thankful.
Yes. One of the aspects of this, if you can call it family business, that we love so much is the community that we've created around us, the community that we've gotten to know, and the friendships that have been formed, as Tripp said. And it's kind of meta when you think about it, that Little House on the Prairie, the values and some of the key reasons that people love it to this day is because it's about the love of a family. It's about when communities come together and neighbors help each other and overcoming hardship and weathering storms, physical and metaphorical. And so it's pretty cool that in our own little way here, at Friendly Family Productions, we've also been blessed to not only have this be part of our family story, 3 generations now, started with my grandparents, then with Tripp, my father, and now with me, but also that we feel like now we're enmeshed in this beautiful web of people who love Little House on the Prairie, love Laura Ingalls Wilder, and bring something new to it every day, whether it's a story that they tell us about their connection to it, or whether it's being on the set of the new show or celebrating the 50th anniversary of the original show. So we're very blessed.
July 9th, people. If you want to catch this new adaptation, put July 9th on your calendar. Before anyone asks me, yes, Rose Wilder Lane wrote Let the Hurricane Roar without her mother's knowledge or consent, but it is true that with Free Land, Laura totally knew about that book, El Manzo did too, and they both helped Rose while she was writing it. You wouldn't have interrupted Tripp either. Thanks so much for listening, folks. This is the conclusion of Season 1, the inaugural season of the Land of Laura podcast. You may see an episode or 2 pop up unexpectedly, but as of right now, there are no regularly scheduled Thursday episodes until this fall. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so in case those special episodes do appear. In the meantime, have a great summer, and if you'd like to contact me, please write landoflaurapodcast@gmail.com. Land of Laura is created and executive produced by me, Sandra Hume. Special thanks to Canadian folk punk band The Dreadnoughts for our theme music, and extra special thanks to all the guests like Tripp and Rebecca, who give so generously of their time and knowledge. And also, I do want to thank the listeners. This podcast would not exist without every single one of you valuing what we have to say. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope you will continue. Make sure you subscribe to Land of Laura on your favorite podcast channel so you can hear about episodes as soon as they drop, including those special ones that might show up this summer. As Pa says, there's plenty more down cellar in a teacup, and as Ma might have said, it takes all kinds of people to make a little house world.